Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression. Man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. changed the world when he demonstrated what could be achieved through nonviolence. Now, you can learn how to live and practice this philosophy yourself through Nonviolence 365 Online, an innovative digital experience developed by the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. Nonviolence 365 Online features extensive video interviews with real nonviolence practitioners, including the King Center CEO Dr. Bernice A. King, King Center certified instructors and trainers, and veterans of the civil rights movement. Explorations of the historic campaigns that helped Dr. King forge his philosophy. Immersive, annotated reading experiences that enhance Dr. King's most influential writings on nonviolence. Custom activities, including quizzes and interactive scenarios to help you practice along the way. Real-world exercises to help you start applying nonviolence in your daily life. Nonviolence 365 is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, engaging, and acting that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. It isn't just a concept for philosophers or political leaders. Nonviolence 365 is a powerful, practical approach to dealing with conflict and dismantling injustice. Whether it's in your personal life, in your school or workplace, your local community, or a national movement. Dr. King, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and many others sought to create the beloved community, a society built on global cooperation and equity. This wasn't a lofty utopian dream. It's a realistic and achievable goal because each and every one of us has the power to make it happen by committing to nonviolence as a way of life. Take the first step today with Nonviolence 365 Online.
Most important is that y'all know where y'all gonna vote on election day. Voting rights is important to me because that's our seat at the table.
We need to continuously promote civic engagement and pull our people back into community organizing, understanding your rights.
There you go. Good job.
Then we got the bus. My canvases out here. Make sure you out here vote.
Child care, education, fair housing, whatever you need, we have it right here.
That's what I'm talking about. Do something. I hear you, sister. I hear you.
The power of the people is like a power they can't deny.
There needs to be representation, someone to say like, this is for us, by us, we care. Representation matters.
To be able to see Black voters matter, having just organic conversations with people, just that pure authenticity and that community.
All day, let's go, Warner Robins. Make sure your vote is counted.
If you see there's a law in your community that you don't like, you have to be able to speak up.
This is my first time voting. It feels amazing, actually. You want to vote it?
I love you, sis.
Love is an action word.
Say that.
Go out and vote.
Everybody get on out here.
We want to make sure that people know that they are loved and that they have power.
We got a ways to go to get the things that we demand for our community. Spreading love, building power.
Become, believe, be love. Be a part of Be Love Day 2025 with the King Center. This July 9th, join others from around the world and take the pledge to be love. To meet this current moment, who should we be? What can we do? And what love-centered goals can we accomplish together? Be Love Day will answer these questions and more. Let's commit to be love. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. Will you stand with us? Save the date, July 9th, 2025. Be Love Day. Visit thekingcenter.org/belove to take the pledge and to stay updated about Be Love Day 2025.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this very special workshop, The King Center and Black Voters Matter. We're partnering to present MLK's letter from Birmingham jail, a prophetic guide to power, love, protest, and liberation. We are so grateful for you being with us. And as we get started, we're going to jump right into it. I want to introduce this great team we have with us, our facilitator team, starting with Cliff Albright, the co-founder and executive director of Black Voters Matter. Hey, Cliff, you got anything you want to share with the folks?
Just real quick. Thank you, Dr. West. Just real anxious to jump into this important topic, right? And thank you all for joining us. And we're gonna have a great discussion. We're gonna talk about the background, the history that led up to this letter from Birmingham jail. We're gonna talk about the themes and the processes and the strategies and all of that. And most importantly, how does this apply to today, right? I think that's what a lot of people are looking for. What can we take out of this letter so that we can be grounded for today? And so with that said, I'm gonna pass it back to you, Dr. West, so you can introduce these other two amazing facilitators that we got joining us.
Thank you, Cliff. Thank you for that. I just want to say on behalf of our CEO, Dr. Bernice A. King, we're so excited to partner with Black Voters Matter for this workshop, and just looking forward to the ways that we can join together to make impact and to heighten awareness of the power of this letter. So thank you to you, and thank you to Latasha, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, for this collaboration. To the whole team. Our other facilitator team members, Gerald Alphen is a certified nonviolence 365 trainer with the King Center. Has spent a number of years studying Dr. King's philosophy, but I'll let him go ahead and introduce himself and share.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome. I'm Gerald Alphen, as she said. I'm excited as well to be here with you all today. I want to thank you for being intentional, first and foremost. And I was trained back in 2007 and did domestic and international and with rebranding with Bernice A. King and Nonviolence 360. I jumped on board of there as well. So a lot of interesting dialogue. This is what I call so pregnant and so much meat on the bone. It's only so much we can do in this platform, but we make sure you get the basics. And also, even with this platform, I know it's a little bit different than being in person, but you all still add a good bit to this. So we do encourage your energy and potential questions, and we got a couple of people monitoring the chat here and there. So for sure, thanks again.
Thank you, Gerald. And then Tiffany Smith, certified nonviolence trainer with the King Center, studying for her doctorate. Tiffany, are you a doctor?
Almost. I'm making it there, Dr. West. I'm a candidate, which is a different experience than a student. But yes, good afternoon, good evening. And honestly, hi, everybody, because you could be anywhere in the world right now. But we're just so grateful that you're here with us. My name is Tiffany Smith. I am so honored and grateful to be a trainer with the King Center, coming from a history and lineage of activism, particularly in the Black Lives Matter movement in Atlanta. And continuing my work as a doctoral student, and just being able to continue to grow and expand my experience as a trainer with the King Center. So I'm just so grateful to be here and so grateful to collab with Black Voters Matter. So thanks so much, Dr. West, and thanks to the team.
Thank you, Tiffany. Listen, we want to encourage you. Put some things in the chat room if you're joining us via webinar. If you are joining via live stream, put some comments and some questions and your insights, the reasons why you're here, where you're from. We want to hear from you in the comment section on YouTube, Facebook, and then you can reply on X. So we want to hear from you as we're sharing more about Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail. Here's a little overview of what we'll cover as you're joining us for this session. The fierce urgency of now, team. Things are so critical. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Why the workshop title matters. Examining history. We want to know why Dr. King was arrested, what was happening in Birmingham. We'll hear more about the statement he was responding to. And check this out. If you register, you will receive a handout with more insights and information on what we're sharing here. There's a 3-page handout that we have for you if you register for the Zoom webinar. We're going to talk a bit about nonviolence because this letter is written in the spirit of nonviolence. So we'll talk about the principles and the steps. And then part 2, understanding our interconnectedness. Now, this extracting strategy section is the bulk of our time with you. We know you want to get into this after the history. What are the key strategies that we can pull from the letter from Birmingham jail? And so understanding our interconnectedness, creative use of time, you see those there. And then we have 2 Q&A sessions for you during this workshop. We want to hear your questions so that we can take what we learn here and apply it to make sustainable change in our community. So welcome again. As we share a bit about why we're in this fierce urgency of now, and team, please chime in with your thoughts on why this is an urgent moment, a critical hour for not just this nation, but globally. This is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from I Have a Dream. He says, "We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action." That's what we want to talk about. How this letter will help get us to vigorous and positive action all over the world. Every day, I see posts, I see comments, and people sharing about letter from Birmingham jail. What is it that so compels us to study it and keep talking about it? Well, in planning this workshop, there was a title that really resonated with Black Voters Matter and with the King Center. And so Cliff's going to share more about why that workshop title matters.
Yeah, thank you. And as many of you, if you're on here, you've obviously seen our post, our graphics, right? And so the title of this is Letter from Birmingham Jail, a prophetic guide to power, love, protest, and liberation. Now the back half of that, probably seems pretty self-explanatory, right? Because, what are we talking about? We're talking about power, the power that Black folks needed in 1963, as well as the power that we need today. We're talking about how love has to be at the center of whatever actions that we're taking in order to build that power and better our community. We're talking about protest because sometimes in the spirit of love and to gain power, we need to protest. And we're talking about liberation because at the end of the day, what we're fighting for, what we were fighting for in 63 and what we were fighting for now isn't just about protest. It isn't just about the things that we don't like. It was like, what does liberation look like? What is our vision for what a better society where we're truly whole actually look like? So those 4 things are self-explanatory. But then there's this other part that's at the beginning of that, this prophetic guide. And, we thought it was important to include that, because being a prophet and having a prophetic message isn't about some like spooky, mystical, your ability to be like a mind reader or to see the future or a crystal ball. It's about being able to look at the material conditions and realities that are in society and the trends and being able to predict where those trends are headed in the future, right? And to speak to that. And that's what Dr. King was doing in 1963 with this letter. And it's prophetic because so much of it applies to today. Again, not so much because Dr. King was a mystic, but because he understood the forces taking place in American society, and that if those forces are not corrected, that we would end up where we are at this moment today, right? And so it's a very much a prophetic message about how we got here, but also, and most importantly, how we're going to get out of this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Cliff.
Yeah. So I'll jump in here now with 4 points about this letter. But before we talk about the 4 points, like I said earlier, there's just so much. We didn't, for the sake of time, we kind of want to put the crosshairs on certain things and bring those to light. And what I would challenge you all to do as we go through this material, this methodology, the of Dr. King. As you hear these techniques and strategies, I would encourage you to kind of merge these on top of your life and the conflicts that you're in or that you see or that you may hear on TV, and begin to think about how can I take it out of the black and white TV frame that we all see, the water hoses and the dogs may be attacking, and then lay these foundational techniques on, like I'm saying, the conflicts of your life. Even domestic, I use this every day, whether I'm in a conflict with a coworker. In a conflict, you have the power. I always say that. So you can begin to exercise these tools, these skills, these very shallow skills that we're going to give to you today. So let's get to this, these 4 points. It is applicable and educational regarding how to provide a nonviolent, love-centered, yet truthful and bold response to criticism of and opposition to justice work. The second point, it can alleviate awareness and insight about the need for true peace, which Dr. King said is not merely the absence of tension, it's the presence of justice. It also contains explanations that translate into wisdom for nonviolent thinking and acting today. That's very important because it really starts with you. You'll hear that a couple of times as well, being self-disciplined and executing this. And the last bullet down there from the letter, it provides the goals, the tactics, and the reasons for the Birmingham campaign and for nonviolent direct action. So with that said, I'll just put a pin in it right there, and I'll turn it over to Tiffany. Tiffany, for some learning objectives.
Yes, and in the spirit of an organizing tradition that we will review and go over today, we want to leave you all with some particular learning objectives to keep in mind as we move through today. So at the conclusion of this workshop, we want you all to be able to share 3 facts about the history surrounding the letter from Birmingham, right? So maybe some things you didn't know about the letter or a new perspective. Share 3 ways that the strategy share 3 ways that the strategy within the letter is relevant today, right? So how is it applicable to the instances of injustice we are witnessing today? State 2 principles of nonviolence that are reflected in the letter. State 2 steps of nonviolence that is also reflected in the letter. And lastly, we want you to express 5 lessons from the letter as you leave this space with us. And so these are our learning objectives today. And these things today, we will spend the time to make sure you all walk away with these things. I'll pass it to you, Dr. West.
I think it's Gerald, the injustice in Birmingham.
You're right, you're right.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in on that one, guys. There was so much going on in the South, and particularly Birmingham. There was plenty of injustice. And just to kind of give you a little bit of a backdrop, and I think Cliff may come in a little bit later and talk a little bit more about it, but you got to understand Birmingham was just a city where you had some moderates that were afraid to step up, even though they may have felt a certain way. You had a lot of Black people that was, just kind of status quo, going about it the same way as just, kind of going along to get along. There's a couple of personalities that I want to introduce to you. There was a powerful personality, and everybody knows Dr. King. I mean, Dr. King is great, but he kind of sucks the air out of the room. And Dr. King needed to bounce things off of the other people. That's why he was really so great at listening to everybody's position and making, decisions. But one powerful personality in not just the Birmingham campaign was a lady named Dorothy Cotton. And Dorothy Cotton was born back in 1930, June 9th, actually, in 1930, in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And she was an educational director for SCLC. And as I'm talking, there's a paragraph that she wrote. I'll get to that in a second, but this is a little inside information. She also was a SCLC representative. That's an acronym for Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I don't want to assume everybody knows. We talk these acronyms all the time. But she taught literacy, citizenship, and nonviolent protest tactics. She also motivated others to register to vote. And like I said, she was a fierce pioneer And she was actually on the innermost circles of Dr. King as well. So, and she also could sing. I ain't say sing, she could sing, y'all. That's it. And Dr. King said she brought a rich talent for song to the heart of the movement. She actually wrote the introduction to Dr. King's book, Why We Can't Wait. And it provides valuable context and gives an inside look from somebody who was actually deeply involved in the movement. So the entire letter of the Birmingham jail that we're pulling these points out today, it can be found in its entirety in that book, Why We Can't Wait. She was from the Birmingham jail. So let's get to this quote. But this is kind of sets the backdrop a little bit, and we'll give you a little bit more as needed. But she said in 1963, Birmingham was often called the most segregated city in America. Our freedom struggle there revealed how brutal and pervasive the segregation pattern was and how challenging and difficult the part of our journey would be. The more we demanded our rights as citizens, the more hatred and violence we encountered from segregationist public officials. Despite the intense opposition, however, hundreds of Birmingham citizens joined the struggle to bring about change. Marching for freedom and submitting to jail became an ordinary daily event. That kind of gives you a elevator pitch intro to what was going on in Birmingham. You'll see through the strategy how they really had to prepare to stay above the curve of the opponent, the opposition. And you'll see the strategy that they did. And so with that said, I think with Cliff, you're going to talk about a little bit more about the Birmingham campaign.
You're muted, Cliff.
I'm on mute. I can hear you, Cliff.
You're saying great
Yeah, so
things.
thank you. Right. Thank you, Gerald. So yeah, Gerald, introduced and talked about Dorothy Cotton. And, what we also need to recognize is, in addition to Dr. King, in addition to Dorothy Cotton, that there were other folks involved in this movement, in this Birmingham campaign. Perhaps, arguably, the most recognized aspects of the Birmingham campaign is what occurred after the letter from Birmingham jail. When you think about Birmingham, the civil rights movement, what images come to your mind? For most people, those images are what? Children in Kelly Ingram Park, fire hoses, dogs, and all of that, right? And so that's an important part of this Birmingham campaign, but that actually comes after the letter. That starts on May 2nd. And then as Gerald was saying, we've got things that come before the letter from Birmingham jail, right? In terms of the work that folks like Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, who's one of the founders of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights in Birmingham. And so, so I raised this for a couple of reasons. One, so that we recognize that this is about movement, that this letter takes place in the midst of a campaign that is about movement, that is beyond one person, that existed before the letter was written and then continued after the letter was written. And that's important for us to recognize in today's time, because so that we can recognize that, we are a part of a movement now. And there's going to be different phases and pieces of that movement. And some of us might write a letter, right? Some of us might be the ones that are Keller Ingram Park, and some of us may be the ones that are the originators of a campaign. And all of that process is important. But that's a little bit more about the Birmingham campaign. I'm gonna pass it on to Tiffany.
Absolutely. And so in the midst of the campaign happening, right, and the success that the campaign was having, on April 10th, 1963, the judge, we'll call him Judge Jenkins, issued a blanket injunction against parading, demonstrating, boycotting, and trespassing. So essentially made all protest action illegal, right? And so Dr. King and other leaders collectively agreed, right? Because they were a strong organizing body. They agreed that they would not adhere to the injunction because while the law was just, it was applied unjustly, right? So while this law was just, it was applied unjustly. So on April 12th, Dr. King, as well as other members of the SCLC, Reverend Robert Abernathy, Fred Shuttlesworth, and other marchers and organizers were also arrested. And I want to give a quote. Again, we show a lot of love to Dorothy Cotton, and I want to just share a quote that she shared about Dr. King's choice to be arrested. So Dorothy Cotton said, Dr. King later explained that he could not encourage hundreds of people to make a stunning sacrifice and then excuse himself. We stood, made a circle, and crossed and held hands as our custom and sang "We Shall Overcome," the anthem of our movement. Some of us sang with tears in our eyes. It was a powerful moment. Dr. King's decision to go to jail was a crucial turning point in the civil rights struggle. Right. So Dr. King's leadership is often always seen as a huge centerpiece, but in this, as you see, there's always a collective experience and a collective agreement with Dr. King and the folks who organize. And so while they were in jail, Dr. King received the statement from 8 Alabama clergymen on April 12th called a call to unity, is what they called it. A call to unity, the public statement of 8 Alabama clergymen, right? And so in this call to unity, a lot of it was essentially criticism of Dr. King and the outsiders who decided to come in and shake things up in Alabama. And one thing we want to consider in this is that when we think about calls to unity, right, and we'll talk about it more later, but oftentimes calls to unity, particularly in this instance, right, oftentimes is an act of negative peace, which we will talk more about later on. But it's this idea that there is no commitment to justice today, and the significance of the state. You compare the calls for unity without a commitment to justice. So you really are calling this unity, but you aren't really calling in justice and really talking about justice. So this then sets the stage for Dr. King's letter, who essentially, in my mind, in a rap battle sense, kind of claps back respectfully at the clergyman.
No, you didn't say Dr. King did a "They Not Like Us."
Oh yeah, Dr. King said, "I got something for y'all." He surely did, in the most beautiful way. In the most beautiful way.
He did. Right. He did. Listen, before we continue and we talk more about the letter and go into the composition of the letter and what was in that statement from the 8 Alabama clergymen, we want to hear from you. What are the issues today as we dive into this letter? I want you to put in the chat here if you're joining via webinar, and also share on social media. What are the issues that brought you here? Because we believe people are interested in this letter because it remains relevant. It's so relevant, it's so powerful, it's so timely. And it causes us to ask those questions that Dr. King asked. Why direct action? Those things we'll talk about in a few minutes about pulling out strategy. What are the issues that brought you here, that you've been thinking about every day, that you just want to know, how do we solve these issues? What should be our approach? What should be our strategy? And you really want to know today, what can we pull from this letter from Birmingham jail, which I believe, as a person who first read it when I was 17, is one of the most teachable tools, something you can just pull lessons from over and over and over again that I've ever encountered. What are the issues today? As we see in the 60s, Mrs. King is marching to make our earth a nuclear-free zone. The woman next to her, women strike for peace. So we want to want you to put in the chat room, what are those issues today as we talk more about the letter? As Tiffany just shared, this letter from Dr. King tactically addressed this. I want you to think about that. In the handout, we asked, why is the word tactically so important? He tactically addresses the criticism from the 8 Alabama clergymen. One of the misnomers about Dr. King is that he practiced this philosophy that was weak. It wasn't weak. It's very astute, wise, purposeful, intentional, strategic. And he shares in this letter in what we believe is the spirit of nonviolence, as the King Center's rebranded Kenyan Nonviolence as Nonviolence 365. He writes it to people, and he shares, with Christians and white moderates, telling us why we should commit ourselves to justice with nonviolence as philosophy and methodology. But this is so powerful because he wrote this letter in jail. And I keep thinking for myself, if I was in jail, what could I write? Mama, come get me. But he took the time to write something so prolific, so profound, that it's still with us today. It started on, in his words, from Why We Can't Wait, the book that Gerald just mentioned, it was started on the margins of the newspaper in which the statement appears. So he got this statement, someone brought it into him, and he started to write his response on the margins of the newspaper in which this statement appeared. And he continued writing it on scraps of paper, and then on a pad until he was permitted to leave. That's, you think about that. So as we get into the letter from Birmingham jail, here's some of the things that we want to consider from this statement from 8 Alabama clergy, 7 Christian clergy, 1 rabbi. Phrases we want to remember: peacefully obeyed. And we talking about negative peace or positive peace, true peace or false peace. He was talked to, or they directed a statement to him that uses this idea that he was an agitator, and he talks about peacefully obeying. Because his words, true peace is not merely absence of tension, it is the presence of justice, law and order. About how we use that phrase today. Outsiders, a realistic approach to racial problems. That's what the clergy wanted him to have. They said he incited violence. Dr. King now, there's a cartoon sketch that says we're looking at this nonviolent activist, and it's saying it sarcastically. So I want you to consider that at that time, because he was so staunch in his opposition to racism and militarism and poverty, that he wasn't considered nonviolent by a lot of people. Technically peaceful. Why did the clergyman label nonviolent direct action as technically peaceful? I want you to get this public statement and pay attention to it. And then they told him that law enforcement protect our city from violence. Now, especially at that time, law enforcement, we see the photos of the water hoses being turned on children. That was the public safety department. That's the fire department. But we also have instances of violence in response to nonviolent protests. Restraint should the demonstrations continue. Talking to him about restraint. And they classified the Negro community, that's the language of the time, in Birmingham as our own Negro community. And so as we, consider Dr. King's response, and we consider the spirit in which it was written, I want to just briefly spend some time talking about that spirit in which it was written, this philosophy and methodology of nonviolence. And Tiffany's going to start us off. I'm going to take you through the principles and steps of nonviolence and encourage you in the brief time that we're doing it to keep studying and to go to thekingcenter.org to find those principles and steps. We're not giving you a long view. We just want to share some key insights.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. West. And I know we have time, but I just want you to take one breath with me. Just take one breath. Because at this point, right, which I often find that we find at the King Center, this is where we get grounded in our principles and our steps to really attack these things from a courageous place. And so one thing I want to note first is that the King Center defines nonviolence. So the King Center has defined nonviolence as a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, acting, and engaging that leads to a personal, cultural, and societal transformation, right? That this act of nonviolence is not this passive, meek, small experience, but it is one of the most courageous things that you can do and that you can be, right? So I'm going to start us off a little bit with our principles. Again, visit the website, please. But we want to start with principle 1, okay? There's 6 of them. Remember, keep these in mind. And we want you to walk away with these, but I'll start with the first 2. So the principle 1 is nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people, right? As I mentioned, it's not a method for the meek. It's not a method for the cowardice. It is an act of nonviolence that is a resistance to evil, both externally, but also the ways that evil can penetrate ourselves and our souls, okay? It's aggressively spiritual, mental, and emotional, right? And that's why we took that breath, because before we act, before we react and respond, we must be centered in our decisions. And these principles allow us to be centered, okay? It's an act of courage, not a passive act, all right? Okay, principle 2. So principle 2 is that nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. Now, when we're up against our enemies or those we deem our enemies, it is hard. It is hard to decide to seek friendship and understanding from those we deem as our opposition. But the reality is that nonviolence does not seek to humiliate the opponent. How often are we online? Are we on the internet, right? And we spend so much time trying to argue or trying to humiliate our opponent that we don't take the time to actually engage and truly listen, right? The end of nonviolence is redemption and reconciliation. And that the purpose of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, right? We always have the goal in mind that we are headed towards the beloved community. We all exist in this world house. We are headed to the beloved community as a collective. All right. And I'll pass it to Dr. West for us to continue on with our principles. Those are our first two.
Thank you, Tiffany. Now, as you consider this letter from Birmingham jail, if you ever read it, you probably see this principle right here. Nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. Because Dr. King wasn't trying to defeat the people. He wasn't writing this response to 8 Alabama clergy saying, I got to take them out of here. Even though he said some things that were honest, they were truthful. He had such a love-centered approach for sharing some hard things. That's because he believed in this philosophy that nonviolence doesn't seek to attack people. It doesn't want to get rid of people. It wants to get rid of evil. Now, if you're thinking about it, then you're saying, you know, like I've been watching the news and saying some folk now, I don't know, how they gonna change? What's gonna happen? Now, the thing about nonviolence is, even as you read the letter, you'll see this thread. It seeks to destroy injustice without dehumanizing a person. And that person can be myself. So I want to remain intact, right? So I want to work on injustice in such a way that I don't become unjust. And that's a daily practice to say, okay, how do I defeat these inhumane immigration policies? I see someone commented here on YouTube. They just deported a 2-year-old girl because her parents were here illegally. I see that comment from Jack on YouTube. You know, that's you want to figure out how to defeat a mentality, a spiritual deficit that would do that without lowering myself to hating people. Because Mrs. Coretta Scott King, our founder at the King Center, said that hate injures the hater more than it injures the hated. That she's talking about spiritual damage. And so if you see that, read the letter, you'll see that reflected. How do I respond? Dr. King had to be thinking to these 8 Alabama clergymen without dehumanizing them. And he found a way to do that. Again, a way so profound that is with us today. This is Amelia Boynton Robinson. Great leader, great activist, great organizer. Selma, Alabama, was leading the Dallas County Voters League before Dr. King even got there. And she had conscious discipline. Principle 4 of nonviolence. Nonviolence believes that unearned suffering for a just cause is redemptive. Whenever I look at this photo, I said, Mrs. Amelia Boynton Robinson was working for something greater than herself, that she wouldn't even see all the end results, but she was willing to sacrifice. I want you to hear that word, sacrifice, to get to something that would benefit generations, voting rights, an end to voter suppression. We're still working on that thing today. They're still dismantling the Voting Rights Act, but she understood that she had to be willing to sacrifice something. Here she put her body on the line. On that Edmund Pettus Bridge, they knew they were walking into batons and violence, but she put her body on the line for this. And so today, that's still our call, right? It's not about this word suffering in the sense that we just go out there and willing to suffer for any old thing, for a just cause. What am I willing to sacrifice? So we look at a photo there, a demonstration. We also believe that it can educate and transform that voluntary, hear that word, voluntary. I know when I go out to do this, something may happen that will feel like suffering, that may be suffering, but it's my sacrifice because for generations to come, it's going to educate and transform. So here is Amelia Boynton Robinson with our CEO, Dr. Bernie C. King, on the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. So as you can tell as we go along here, we're just sharing some insights with you about some people who were very critical, very important to the civil rights movement. As a reminder to each of us that we too have a calling and an assignment. We want this session to activate you even more so into what it is that you're assigned to do as you're part of, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, making of this old world a new world. Gerald?
Yeah, and man, amen to that. That principle right there always used to knock me off my square a little bit because of that suffering word. But when I began to, put the slash maybe and use sacrifice, that really helped me. And there's a goal, like you said, Ms. Boynton had that goal. You got to have a goal, because if you don't have a goal, it's victimization. So that really helped me. But let's move on. We got principle 5 here, and this says that nonviolence chooses love. Look at the word there, chooses loves. again, remember, I keep circling back. It's got to start with you. And at this point, I always call the principles the will. When we get to the steps, that's kind of the skill. But right here, we can change and sacrifice timelines and schedules, but we don't mess with these principles. Okay, so this is the will, and once you begin to integrate this and adopt this inside of you, you want to choose love instead of hate. And that's what Dr. West was just talking about. Dr. King, he chose not to demonize and attack the issue. So that's what you're doing here. Nonviolence resists violence of the spirit as well as the body. So you start talking about practical use of violence of the spirit. What's going on with your eye gate, your ear gate, or what are your thoughts? Are you when you talk about practical use of this, I always think about, do you encourage yourself, or are you internally saying, I don't measure up, I'll never be able? Those words that some parents put on their kids and they hear it internally for the rest of their life. You're just like your dad. You're never going to amount to nothing. So you've got to protect that. That's the internal violence of the spirit that you don't want to be, just beating yourself up with. So if you look in that third bullet, nonviolence avoids becoming bitter, engaging in hate campaigns. That's what we were just talking about. It wasn't about the person. The people always have an expiration date. It's not about them. Okay? They always have a season. This is about justice. Dr. King talked about putting the bus boycott, the buses, and justice out of business, and putting the buses and righteousness in business. That last bullet, the fourth one, nonviolent, is love, spontaneous, unmotivated, unselfish, and creative. I'm starting to hear a little bit of agape love in there. We don't cover that too much today, but again, these are points that, after you hear this little elevator pitch, you may want more of this, and we'll tell you how to get more. That last bullet point, nonviolence recognizes the fact that all life is interrelated. It's interconnected. You'll hear more about that. And it's so true. It's so true. So that's a little bit about avoiding internal violence of the spirit and choosing love instead of hate. As we move on to the sixth principle, nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. Principle 6 here. The nonviolent resistor has a deep faith that nonviolence will eventually win. Nonviolence believes that God is God of justice. Now, let me go a little bit into this, and I'll be quick, team, but I want you all to understand this at a higher level. When we talk about the universe, take it above man. You see my hand. I'm above man. We are free moral agents here. The universe is in the stars. It's the cosmos. I call them God. This is for anybody. This is for atheists. They believe whoever hung the moon and the stars, is a cosmic companion. So I'm not entertaining somebody to say, okay, well, if the universe is on the side of justice, Gerald, then what's up with this, my neighbor who is disabled or has a special needs kid or has a son that's, addicted. So, again, this is above man. This is the cosmos. And we believe that the nonviolence practitioner has a deep-rooted faith in the universe. And Dr. King, I may not get there with you, but he believed in that dream. And we always say, that if you violate the universe, it's going to correct itself. You just look at a forest fire, you just live long enough, it's going to correct itself. There's a balance in the cosmos, okay? And the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that means that there's just a balance that's higher than man. So I hope that kind of helps you a little bit about the universe being on the side of justice. And with that said, we'll get into the steps, the skill part that I call.
Yeah, and we'll touch on this briefly. But again, y'all, I want y'all to recognize that we took time to center in our principles to then decide on our steps of action, right? So we're centered and now we're enacting our steps. So really quickly, step one is information gathering. So make sure you understand fully all sides of the argument or all sides of the issue that you are standing up or fighting against. The second step is education, meaning you educate those in your community and outside of that, but you provide education about the issue, about the topic to those who need to know, right, in community. And I pass it to you, Dr. West. Sorry, Gerald. My apologies, Gerald.
Oh, okay. So we're into the third step, and again, this is the skill part for me. You learn these, and you've got these extra tools in your bag. Personal commitment. Now, in the letter, let me bring you real quick. In the letter, Dr. King talks about 4 steps. It was self-purification. After his assassination, Mrs. King and some of the other leaders at the King Center, they added 6 steps of nonviolence, and they changed the self-purification. Number 3, they changed it to personal commitment. That's what you're seeing right there. And it was actually, the 4 steps were done by the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And like I said, that was the self-purification. They were doing a workshop at a prison. And so they felt that that was a little bit too spiritual, and they've changed it to what you're looking at, personal commitment. And it's basically just that. If you're going to endeavor in a direct action, you need to see it through. So whatever you need to do, back in the day, they had meetings at the churches, whether you need to fast, some people jog and clear, meditate, whatever you need to do, listen to song, but you need to see it through, because the worst thing to do is to not be able to. Okay. So after that, we've got negotiation. You never stop negotiating. Sometimes if you negotiate, you don't even have to get to the remainder of these steps. So you're always looking to sit down at the table. You're always putting your demands out there. And sometimes you won't have to. In Birmingham, they tried to negotiate. They thought they had a good faith effort. Some of the signs came down when they heard that Southern Christian leadership was coming to town. They got a little rattled, but then those signs started to go back up. So they had no choice. They had to do their direct action. So negotiation is something you always want to do, and you want to create a win-win situation. You don't want to, I say, win over your opponent. You want to win your opponent over. We want to come out of this where we're working together. You feel like you got a good part of it. I got a good part of it, and we're fine. That's negotiation.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you, Tiffany. Listen, these steps are very important. Thank you, Gerald, for providing the background on them. And again, 4 of them are in the letter. 6 principles of nonviolence. You can find those in Dr. King's book, Stride Toward Freedom. In the 6th chapter, Pilgrimage to Nonviolence. Just to keep your study going, We're going to talk about direct action in great detail in about 10, 15 minutes. So stay with us for that. But we'll go to reconciliation. The main thing I will point out about direct action is the goal of it is to get us back to negotiation. So if we negotiated and we say, okay, here are the things that we know will put us on track for justice. Do you agree to these things? No. Okay, then we're going to have to put pressure on you to agree to these things. So Dr. King, and where do we go from here? Chaos or Community, his book, his 1967 book, he said, our nettlesome task is to discover how to organize our strength into compelling power so that the government cannot elude our demands. That's what direct action does. That's what all of this does. The strategy that does that, all to get us to reconciliation. And reconciliation, no matter what you heard, reconciliation is not we just agree to get along. Reconciliation is repentance. Reconciliation is repair. That dirty word, reparations. Reconciliation means justice. It means we decide, in the words of Dr. King, to work together with love to correct everything that stands against love. That's his definition of justice. Justice at its best, he said, is love correcting everything that stands against love. Reconciliation is many layered, it's multifaceted, and it is just not this idea that I have Black friends, I have white friends, I have Asian friends. It has to do with what is my determination to be more just and more humane, and how do we connect to do that? We reconcile and come back to our original intent for being here, which was community. We were never supposed to not be in harmony. It's always been about community. So if we can see that, we can create reconciliation. We can use nonviolence to get there. We want to talk a bit about this spirit of nonviolence, this definition of Kenyan nonviolence that Tiffany shared earlier. We'll put it up for you. And now we want to take some questions as we prepare for a brief break. We know this is a long workshop, so we want to take some questions as we prepare for a break. And when we come back from break, we'll be talking about extracting strategy from the letter. I see some questions here, team.
Yeah, there's
go ahead, Cliff.
there's a couple. Yeah, there's a couple questions in the chat. One is more of an observation, in that it seems like we're asking for the same things that we were asking for in 1963. But I'm gonna jump to the other two questions. Actually, I'm gonna go to the last question first from Empress. As we speak of love and nonviolent behavior, how can we continue to have that mindset when leaders and the justice systems are violent to us? In Tennessee, representatives and lawmakers are taking rights away. And I think that's an important point, in terms of thinking about, how do you implement and exhibit love, when you've got people that are directly opposed to your rights, in some cases, even to your very lives, right? And I think that the thing that sometimes people gloss over is that love doesn't mean non-correction, right? In fact, there are folks that are closest to us that we correct all the time, and sometimes correct quite harshly, right? Gerald talked about that agape love. Jesus was still acting out of love when he turned those tables over, right? The money changers. And so love doesn't mean that we don't offer correction and accountability. And certainly the people in Tennessee or Georgia, where I'm at, or any of these other states, or the federal government in DC, they need to be corrected. And that's part of this process that we're talking about, in this grounding that we're offering in that workshop. But I don't think we need to forget that all of that correction and all of our actions can still be grounded in love, grounded in love for ourselves, love for our community, right? Even what do we say, like in the South, when somebody offers an opinion that seems uninformed? What do we have to say? Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah, I know it.
Right. And so, but bless your heart doesn't mean that you don't need to be corrected. Right. And so I just think that we can hold both of these things at the same time, that we are grounded in love, grounded in our love for the vision of what we're trying to create, even in love and wanting those people that are opposing us, wanting them to be better people. Right. But that does not mean that we will not correct them. So I just wanted to offer that. And then, I don't know if anybody else wants to, add on or address the other questions that's in the chat. There's a good one in there about the unjust laws, which is a point that I know that we're going to talk about in just a minute when we get into the strategies that are outlined in the letter. But I'll just turn it back to you all.
Thank you for sharing all that, Cliff. It's so true. It's hard, because it's the end result. If we all choose to dehumanize each other, it's that chaos. Even the title of Dr. King's book was so profound. Where do we go from here, chaos or community? So I could choose chaos. I could choose to be unloving, but again, that puts my soul at stake, and that puts my consciousness at stake. And we're talking about a letter from a man who found this way and learned this way to some extent to treat people who were mistreating him well, while at the same time telling them, often to their face, that he wasn't going to acquiesce to injustice. That's a way. I think that's a way that you learn and you decide to go that way. And so, as he said, we have to learn to live together, or we'll be forced to perish together. In fact, we have to learn to live together, the language of that time, as brothers. I say as family, or we will be forced to perish together as fools. And so that's where we are. I know Sharon had this question about unjust laws. Basically, I think she's asking, how is it that the law that Dr. King broke that got him arrested was unjust? I think as we talk about just and unjust laws, we'll discover that it should have been more specifically phrased as a just law applied unjustly. There was nothing wrong with that law. There's just that they bought it up and applied it in a situation where they wanted to arrest Dr. King and they wanted to stop justice. And so that's what happened with that. And we'll talk more about just and unjust laws as a part of the letter.
Before we move on, I'm looking through the chat, and thank you everybody that's putting all your questions and comments in the chat, and even the shout outs, just acknowledging where you all are from. There's so many people on here from so many states, and so we're really grateful for that. There's one question in there from Louise, and there's several really good questions, but this one stood out to me because it's something that I know as organizers or as community members we face all the time. Louise asked the question, how do we build community of committed people who are ready to follow the 6 steps when we are so spread out that we can't prepare together, right? And I think that this is a critical question, because a lot of times what prevents us from taking action, whether it's actions on these 6 steps or actions on anything, right? Or even actions on, am I going to go to the movies? How many other people can I get that are going to go to the movies? I mean, there's so many examples in our lives and our organizing where our action is dictated by how many people we think we can have down with us, right? And I think it's important for us to realize how much can be done just by acting with those that you have, right? Sometimes they may be even acting on your own. Let us not forget, before we got to the Children's March, again, Dr. King was in jail. And part of the reason was that he was in jail is because of this very issue that Louise has raised, because the grown folk weren't getting down in the movement in Birmingham, at least not at the numbers that we needed them to. And that's where the idea was, well, if the grown folk ain't gonna do it, if they're scared, if they got jobs, then we got to get the children involved, right? But the point being, we can't let not having enough or not thinking we have enough to keep us from taking action with the folks that we have. So part of the reason we're even doing this workshop is because we want everybody to be at least on the same page around the rationale of the letter and around the call for direct action, the rationale of the 6 steps. Like, we want even if you don't get involved, even if you're not the one protesting, right? We need everybody to at least be on the same page in thought, in terms of understanding why did this, is that we can't have what we had in 2020, where the young folks were out on the street after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and we had a bunch of folks, some of them older, right, saying, oh, y'all are being reckless. Why are y'all doing that? Why can't you just wait, right? Which is an issue that we're going to talk about in a minute. Why the timing is not right, right? Similar to what the clergy were saying in that letter to Dr. King. And so that's part of why we're doing this, so that we can make it clear, one, we need everybody to understand what this is that we're talking about, that Dr. King was talking about. But more importantly, we want folks to understand how you can how you can walk in faith, how you can take action, how you can proceed on these steps and processes, even if you don't have 1,000 people, right? Or 10,000 people, right? And guess what? At the end of the day, sometimes it's actually better that you even have fewer that are more committed, right? Ask Gideon about that, right? From the Bible.
Listen, Cliff,
and so,
as you said that, Sharon commented on YouTube, sometimes you don't need the whole tribe because some people don't have the same vision.
That's right.
That's right. You know what else, team? And I'm just listening to that. And it's really about mobilization. And that's the question. How can we move today? And you look back to the blueprint that we have, And we're learning this, guys. Dr. King was great at information gathering, number one. Then he educated. You know, a lot of times we've got these wonderful tools. You know, we can mobilize quickly and create a cookout. Everybody at the cookout, how they just show up here. You got kids that go to these intersections and they're doing the wrong thing. They're doing donuts. How did all these kids get over here? So we have the tools. We just off on our messaging. And I see a lot of I see a lot of people, and I think as Reverend Al always says, we can have different opinions, but we can't have different facts. So our facts have to line up. Like Dr. King was great on messaging. I always talk about the little girl that was marching, and she was like 6 years old. And one of the cops was like, you know, just kind of sarcastically leaned down and said, well, what are you out here for, little girl? And she said, feed them. She couldn't even really pronounce freedom, but she had that messaging. And I think if we get on the same page, like you said, if we get that core group, it'll snowball because everybody will be on point with the messaging. That's what I think is missing today. Sometimes you got a protest and you got two different groups out here on the east side and the west side on Washington at the Capitol, and they're out there for different reasons. That's just my take.
Yeah. The strategy.
And Kia brings up it's easy to mobilize, to organize. That's the move as well. And I think oftentimes too we have high critique for our folks who are in the streets while not also recognizing the counter actions and counter technologies of our opposition, like the police and other ways that suppression happens, like we noticed in the letter too. So yeah, I also just want to lift up that folks are continuously organizing and showing that commitment. And also we have to continue to strategize, right, with the steps and principles and other ways to outsmart and and almost like show up in a different moral fortitude than our opposition at times.
Yeah. And as we prepare to go to break, I'll share a quote from Dr. King. He said, those who love peace must learn to organize as effectively as those who love war. I think that's one of the things we're looking at. You know, it would appear as though those who love injustice are thoroughly organized. And that doesn't mean we want to be in competition with evil or in competition with injustice, but we do need to think, okay, what's our strategy? In the letter, as we talk about it more, we're going to extract strategy. We want to talk about what are the strategies. So it's not too late for you to invite some people to tune into the stream, to join us for part 2 of this workshop. As we go to break, we're going to go to break for 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back and share more with you in greater detail about the strategies found within the letter.
Dr. West, do you think there was a comment in the chat? Do you think we should try to push through and skip the break to get back on time? I don't know.
I don't know. Now, only if the people in the webinar don't need a break. I think the break was for the people in the webinar session. So if they're good, we can keep going.
Let's see if anybody chimes in the chat.
Yeah.
How y'all feeling?
See a few thumbs up floating around.
Please keep going.
They said we good. I'm good. Please keep going.
They good.
Trainers, I guess we on fire, huh? Trainers, the group, the collective, we're on fire, huh? We want to keep it rolling. Let's keep it going. I love the energy. Love the energy. And that's an hour, Dr. West team. That's an hour that feels like, 20 minutes. It's amazing.
That's what they said. It felt like 20 minutes.
That's how it feels to me. That's the fire I'm feeling.
Right.
No, that's just me. That's just the energy I'm feeling. You know what I mean?
All right. All right. Well, we'll keep going. Extracting strategy, Cliff. As we look at this photo, just think about what we see here at this planning conference at Atlanta University, mid-May 1960. Dr. King and other activists, they're discussing strategy. How much time do we spend, or do we think we have time to discuss strategy? But it's definitely something that has to be done. And as we look at this letter, we want to really examine, as we talked about the history of it and then the spirit of it with nonviolence, what strategies can we pull from it? So we have five or six that we want to share with you and just highlight some strategies. And then we want to activate you. We want to say, hey, now what are our action steps after this? I know Black Voters Matter has this We Fight Back campaign. And we have some things that we're doing at the King Center. We want to merge together and invite you to take some action after this session. So Cliff, when you think about extracting strategy from this letter, how would you introduce it to folks, the importance of this letter for strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when we think about strategy, we're thinking about, again, we're thinking about the principles, we're thinking about the tactics that we need to take. We're thinking even about the sequencing of those tactics, right? We're thinking about, I often talk about, a lot of us learned early on in writing, we learned the asking the questions where, when, what, why, right? And then when you're doing something informative, that you do that. And I think strategy is the same way. And there's a lot of things in this letter that informs us around the who, around the where, around the when, around the why, and the how. And so if you're looking for a blueprint, it can be found right here in this letter. And so we're about to go through, some of the elements of what's included in that blueprint. And I think the first one that I think you're going to talk about, Dr. West, is, it connects to that where question, right? Where do we get engaged, right? So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, this understanding our interconnectedness, that's a key strategy. The strategy is reiterate moral clarity and humane concerns that encompass the issue. So the issue in Birmingham was segregation, particularly with public accommodations, but the issue was within a larger issue of injustice that comes from heart issues, ideology. So when we think about these issues we see today, and you share with us some of the issues you're concerned about, then we're also asking where these issues come from, and how do we lose our interconnectedness? How do we forget who we are over the course of time, and how we matter to each other? Those are the heart questions, right? The conscious questions, the questions that prick us. And so when Dr. King was called an outsider in the public statement from 8 Alabama clergy, this was his response when they said, why are you even in Birmingham? That may be the question you get sometimes. Why do you even care about that? People ask me that all the time. Why do you even care about Palestinians? You should just be caring about people here in the United States. Why do you even care about anti-Semitism? Why are you building a school in Liberia? Why are you here thinking about this country? Why do you care about Sudan and the Congo and Cameroon? Why do you care about mudslides in Kenya and harm coming to Nigeria and what's happening in Australia? Why do you care? I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Moreover, I'm cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives in the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere in this country. And Dr. King believed anyone who lived in what he called this world house can be considered an outsider anywhere in the world. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Listen, we see today that we have to extract from this letter, from other teachings of Dr. King and from other great thinkers, the understanding that we are interconnected. If we can come up with messaging and use Dr. King's messaging to help people understand that we care about this injustice because we're an interconnected humanity. We live in this world house and can't be confined to only thinking about things based on our tribe, based on our religion, based on our nation. We can't let nationalism guide us. So how do we pull strategy from that? Here's what he did. He reiterated moral clarity. He continued to, even in this letter, say, this is my moral stance on this. And so our messaging, as Gerald mentioned, our messaging, when we're talking about movement building has to be consistent, where we say, I am here because injustice is here. You know, this is why I care about this, and lay out for people why do you care? So sometimes we may think I shouldn't even have to say all that, but we have to think about what is our ultimate goal. If our ultimate goal is to, via getting rid of injustice in one issue, helping to perpetuate and create a better humanity and the beloved community, then we say, I need to do what I need to do to get that done. May not always feel good. You may think they should understand that already, but some people are in such a place, as I've been before. You know, raise your hand out there if you haven't always thought the way you think today. Sometimes we act like we've always been just in our thinking, but not only that, I still got a long way to go in my thinking, my ideology, my engagement with people. So I have to reiterate my moral compass to myself and say, okay, why are we here? So whatever you're working on out there, if there's an issue you're concerned about, immigration, if you're looking at, you know, the things that are happening across the globe with militarism, and you want to say, how do I compel people to be a part of working on that with me? Then you start to say, okay, let me reiterate moral clarity and the broader humane concerns, and then narrow it down to that main issue. It's very important that we understand our interconnectedness.
Before you move on from that, and whoever has the
Sure,
slides, if y'all
certainly.
could go back to that slide, you know, the other thing I think is important about that is that interconnectedness speaks to the issues that we're facing, right? And where we're facing them. But what it also means is, and this is embedded in what he's saying, is that interconnectedness is a part of the solution. So we can act in an interconnected way, even when we're not necessarily in the same place. Like, I'm looking at the graphic that's on the slide, and one of the things I like about this graphic is what it shows is hubs of activity that are interconnected. So a lot of times, like when we think about mass action, we think everybody needs to come to DC, you know, or everybody needs to come to Ferguson, right? And certainly there are times when that's necessary, but guess what? There's also times when what's shown in this image can also exhibit our interconnectedness. Having 50, 100, or 1,000 different protests spread out all across the cities, I mean, all across the country, that are still interconnected and acting out of that same alignment of thought and purpose. That's also the interconnectedness. And so just recognizing that we are interconnected in the issues that we're facing, the challenges and the obstacles, but we are also interconnected in the ways that we strategize and take direct action against that.
Absolutely. And that brings up the question, Cliff, as I always think, what would Dr. King, as I use my vernacular from growing up, what would Dr. King and them have done with social media and with the ability to have technology? Because, you know, in Montgomery, Joanne Robinson and folks from Alabama State were creating flyers and disseminating them, and they planned a boycott that lasted a year.
That's right.
Without social media.
That's right.
You know, pull people together, because they understood if we can get people on message and understanding what we're doing, and everybody out there saying, I'm gonna have to carpool, I can't get on the bus. We're gonna have to walk, I can't get on that bus. You know, then we can build something. So you're right, these little hubs of activity, that interconnectedness, because these evils we face are interconnected. We have to have a strategic way to approach them in our mobilizing and organizing.
Every time I see the interconnectedness and I read this quote, it just throws me back to a child's perspective. Our oldest child, when he was roughly, I guess, 6 years old, and we would drive by homeless people, he just had such a heart for humanity, stray pets, etc. And he would just be emotional for like 6 minutes after we drove past, even if we, you know, felt on our spirit to help that individual. And it's just that humility that he had, you know, where we have to get away from apathy. You see that person under the bridge, and it's like you drive by there every day going to work, and the first time you saw him, it was like, oh man, this guy's out here and he's got a tent. And then by the end of the week, you just doing what you do, you know. So it's a mindset, and I always, every time I see this, I'm thrown back to that. I just wanted to share that quickly. Okay, so this is on me. Creating creative use of time. So Dr. King was great with time. And as we go through this, you'll hear a little bit more of the strategy and how they did it and how they moved and strategized. But I'll read this first and then talk a little bit more about it. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well timed. That quote there. And in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation, for years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro, piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our own distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. So you see early on in here, he says, man, we are all too familiar. And that just kind of rings out that Dr. King, he knows all the tactics. He knows all the tactics of his opponent. The injunctions were always set up there. It was a tool that was given in Birmingham. They not only threw the injunction out there, but before he had to make that leap of faith and get arrested, he learned that, the bail bondsman's funds were insufficient. What they were using to bail everybody out. That's why it was a leap of faith. I mean, he had to go pray about that thing. So there was a lot of tactics. And as far as the time restraints, he had all this in 1955 and 1962. They learned from Albany, Georgia, how to kind of come in and strategize. Even in Birmingham, timing was everything because they were going to have a mayor's election. So they had to pretty much shut down the strategy because the time that they were going to use was the second biggest economic buying event for African Americans, and that was around Easter. Okay, so Dr. King was always strategizing and using time as an ally. Okay, we're on the second slide here, and this is talking a little bit more about it. Actually, he says time itself is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. More and more, I feel that the people of ill will have used time more effectively than have people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively in the knowledge that time is always ripe to do right. Now is the time to make the real promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now, he says, is the time to lift our national policy. So see, Dr. King thought outside the box. He understood as a visionary what potentially could happen. Again, with the messaging, with where we were as a people. So he understood that, man, a lot of times, it's like my analogy of that is the people that's good with time are like the criminals that, man, you got a brain like that. You should be doing something for the good. You went through all of that to be doing the wrong thing. That's my analogy when he says he's talking about the ill-will people are using time to their advantage so much more than people of goodwill. Okay. So with that, I think Cliff and Tiffany and Dr. West are going to come back, talk a little bit more about direct action.
Cliff.
And this direct action piece, I mean, all of these are connected, right? But I see a real strong connection between what Gerald was just talking about in terms of time and the direct action, right? because time is, and I'm gonna actually connect that to, there's a question in the Q&A where somebody says, how can we measure our progress as diverse groups once we review the letter from Birmingham jail and the 6 principles of nonviolence? And I think that all of these things are connected. The time issue impacts even how we perceive progress, right? Because a lot of times we're not working on it even on the same time horizon as the opposition is, right? To the point that Gerald just made, that he just read, how they're able to use time. You know, when you are the status quo, time is inherently on your side, right? Because all you really need to do is just drag out time before anything changes, right? And so, but when you're the marginalized, when you're the vulnerable, when you're the oppressed, then the stretching out that time actually hurts, because we're hurting as the status quo is being maintained. And so, and I'm gonna bring it back to the direct action and to the quote that's on the screen. But to answer Connie's question about that, is I think that part of the way that we measure the progress, the easy way is to measure, like, did we get a win? Did we get the victory? Did we get the segregation in downtown Birmingham ended, right? Did we get the segregation on the buses ended? Did we get police violence to stop in our communities? But the other way, and we talk about this a lot at Black Voters Matter in terms of how we measure progress, and this applies to the direct action that we're about to talk about, is, have we gotten stronger as a coalition, as a community, as a movement, right? If we understand that part of the efforts of the opposition is to keep us disconnected, right? Divide and conquer is the oldest trick in the book. Well, if it's the oldest trick in the book, then by definition, our ability to resist that division is progress. And so one of the things we often look at when we come out of a campaign is, have we gotten stronger? Have our relationships gotten stronger? Because at the end of the day, if our relationships have gotten stronger as a community and as a movement, then the victory is inevitable. In fact, the victory is already here. And so, so that's part of, and part of the trick of the opposition is to get us to believe that if we don't get the short-term win, that what we are doing, therefore, must have been wrong. And they try to get us to change our tactics. And the reason they try to get us to do that is because they know that there's going to be long-term success. They know that the short-term defeat for us isn't really a defeat if we've gotten stronger in the process. And so they're constantly trying to tell us, and sometimes the media is complicit in that, trying to get us to convince us, oh, you're losing. Change your strategy, change your tactics, do something different, right? But we have fundamentally got to know that if we have gotten stronger, if we have gotten closer, if we have built up love, if we have strengthened our relationships, then we are on and going in the right direction. Direct action is a part of that process, right? It is a part of a process that includes strengthening our relationships. So I'm gonna just read real quick, just the quote, which again comes right out of the letter. You may ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You're quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which is constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there's a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. And I would add on to that any progress requires tension. Any movement forward requires tension. I often use the example, you know, some of us, when we were children in school, you know, if you were a troublemaker like me, you might have occasionally taken a rubber band and tried to, you know, shoot it at somebody who was sitting in the class on the other side of the classroom or something. And, you know, I often think about that because at the end of the day, what did you have to do to that rubber band before you could shoot it forward? You had to pull it back. You had to create tension in the rubber band before it could even be propelled to move forward. And that is life. that we often have got to have that creative tension before anything can move forward. And the same applies to movement, and the same applies to direct action. And so the tension that is created, both the tension between us and our opposition, as well as sometimes, and this is the hard part for folks to understand, sometimes the internal tension, the tension within coalition is sometimes necessary, because it also creates movement forward, right? If we understand its place and if we are honest with each other and willing to work through it. And so, I'll just pause there. I can't remember who else on the team is joining in this direct action discussion, but one of the things we want y'all to think about and put into the chat is, how does this call impact us today? What does this call for direct action look like today? What does a call for direct action look like when you've got a person in the White House who has in the past and continually expresses a desire to use bullets, for the army to use bullets against protesters? So what does direct action look like in that context? Some people would say that the risk of direct action today are just as great, if not more so, than what was faced in 1963 in Birmingham. And the last thing I'll say on this, Gerald talked about the 4-year-old who was interviewed, who had been involved in the Children's March in Birmingham. I was watching a video once where they're interviewing a bunch of those. I'm sure y'all have probably seen it. And one of the young ladies who was being interviewed, modern times, who had been a child and involved, said, people told us y'all can't go to that park, Kelly Park. Y'all can't be in that protest because you could get hurt. I think they may have even said you could die. And her response was so chilling. She said, the truth is, we were young and Black in Birmingham. We faced the possibility of dying every day, right? And so again, just thinking about what does this all mean in terms of what direct action looks like today? How do we modify it so that it becomes I can't say safe, because none of it is ever safe, right? But so that we've taken certain things into account. But I'll pause there and see if anybody else on the team wants to add on to that.
Yeah. Thank you, Cliff. Thank you for that. And just to continue on thinking about how Dr. King frames direct action is, as Cliff explains, he frames it right in this context of why. But then he goes on and lays this framework, right? He goes on to say, in any nonviolent campaign, so remember, there are all types of direct actions, right? But in a nonviolent, and this is what he says directly, in any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: the collection of facts that determine whether injustice exists, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. Now I'm going to pause really quick, right? Because remember, we told you all quickly about 6 steps, right? In this letter, he begins to lay out those 6 steps. And as he mentions here, right, he says, the collection of facts to determine whether injustice exists, right? That's step 1, our information gathering, right? He then goes on to say negotiation. That is our step 4, right? But he mentions negotiation. Self-purification, which Gerald talked about earlier, but it is this personal commitment, right? So what is our personal commitment to this work? And then step 5 is direct action, right? So there are 6 steps, and it takes us 4 steps before we get to direct action, okay? And so again, he develops this in this letter as he's in the jail writing passionately about this thing, but then continues on to create these 6 steps. And so he continues on to say, we have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying in the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro houses and churches in Birmingham than in any other place in the nation. And I saw you all earlier in the chat comment Birmingham, because that was the city's nickname, right? These are the hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, the Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. So again, as an outsider, right, he pushed in these ways to say, look, here is the facts. Here is what is happening in Birmingham. And here are some strategies that we can employ and enact to move things. And as we saw, things got moved, right? And yeah, Dr. West, I'll let you share any last things, but these are just some of our major things about direct action, the why, and also how we do direct action in ways that honor nonviolence.
You know, I'll just add that Dr. King said that the purpose of direct action is to dramatize the issue and to make it clear who's the oppressed and who's the oppressor. And so one of the reasons why, like, even if we read Why We Can't Wait, we see the example of how people were trained on sometimes quickly on nonviolent direct action. And if they couldn't agree to participate in direct action in a nonviolent way, meaning not just physically nonviolent, because that's not what Kenyan nonviolence is. Kenyan nonviolence means that you avoid all types of violence, even in language. So if they couldn't agree to do that, if they were going to be a person who would distract from the issue and get in a position where it wasn't clear who's the oppressed and who's the oppressor, would take attention away from the goal for the reason why they were out there, then that person was invited to do something else. I mean, that may seem hard, but you know, if you have a goal and you say, this is a campaign where we're trying to reach this goal, whether it's legislation, whether it's, it's policy change, whether it's a shift in who's in a certain position, your goal has to be so utterly important to you that when you're engaged in direct action, you're not distracted by what the other is doing. And so that took some training. And when people were trained on it and they could agree to it, you see the results. You see at the lunch counter, you see today, if people engage in nonviolent direct action, it becomes so apparent to people. That's why people were moved by Edmund Pettus Bridge, because it was so clear who was the oppressed and who was the oppressor. The issue was so well dramatized that when people say, oh, that won't work today, I would challenge us to say, oh, where are we really trying it? Where are we trying and saying, okay, let's get some people in here and train them on how not to respond with violence to violence. And if we do that, if we emphasize and educate on nonviolent direct action and its nuances, then that's the important thing too. Who do you need to make it go? I want you all to think about that for a moment. If you're going to have nonviolent direct action, who are the folks you need on your team? I'm not just talking about a whosoever will call. I'm talking about who strategically, Cliff, Tiffany, Gerald, do you need on your team if you're going to go out for some nonviolent direct action? Because Dr. King had a negotiator. If you look, you see that Ambassador Andrew Young was never in direct action because he needed to negotiate to get people out of jail. So he couldn't be in jail. So if you're planning nonviolent direct action, you need folks like a spokesperson. People think they had a dress code for respectability politics. No, they needed to be clear. Who out here protesting with us? Who's out here that's a part of what we planned? Because there could be provocateurs who show up who are not a part of what we planned. And we'll be somewhere throwing some Molotov cocktails and we all in jail. But we didn't bring no cocktails. Somebody else brought some cocktails.
And they vetted them too, Dr. West.
Strategy. Yeah.
They vetted them. They had to, sign a waiver and pledge. I mean, they knew who was out there.
They had goals. And I think when I look at the way, before we even started this session, somebody from the Black Voters Matter team was telling me they had a bus tour, I think she said in Mississippi. And I was like, wow, it takes a lot to plan something like that, to have the strategy to say, we want to get people to vote. So when you sit down and you say, how do we actualize what we envision? And you put the strategy into it, then you start to see some successes lining up. And that's everything we're seeing now is so disheartening. I mean, I was looking at some news this morning and literally I started to call upon the name of the Lord to help me, to help me better see a strategy and to be a part of things to change what I'm looking at, because it's so much and so many things thrown to us at once. But if we find, as you look at organizations like Black Voters Matter and then the King Center, just sticking with what we do, being able to say, this is what we do. We're going to get in it. We're going to work it. We're going to strategize. We're going to organize. And we're going to do it with nonviolence. Why direct action? Because we can't just be sitting here anymore looking at the world disintegrate. I know all of you out there watching, you want to get up and do something, and you're trying to figure out how to do it. And we're hoping this letter is in what we're talking about is giving you some insight on how to do. We want to emphasize and educate on nonviolent direct action and its nuances. And if you want to engage in nonviolent direct action, you got to tell people what it is, and you have to educate them on it, train them on how to do it, actually, and create some spaces where people can learn this is why. Because so many folks don't understand nonviolent direct action. They just think, it's old, it's antiquated, but it's not. It's simply a space where you say, let me have some strategy. For one, the main thing it does for me is, how do I engage in direct action without becoming the monsters that I'm seeing, these injustices I'm seeing? And that's what nonviolent direct action does. It helps me not go out to protest to insult people or to dehumanize them. I just want y'all to stop killing folks. I want police to stop killing people. I want militarism. And sometimes we have militarized police. I want militarism to stop killing people. I want, the things you lay out. So that's one thing you can do right now. You can share right now, put in your notes on your phone, or your device, the thing that thing that you say, I want to strategize around how to use nonviolence, specifically nonviolent direct action, to address that thing. And then you start to think about it and plan around it. Do we have any questions or we have any comments about this particular strategy? As you're looking, I'll say this is a flyer. Please stay off all the buses that Joanne Robinson, who was a professor at Alabama State, created to distribute as a part of the Montgomery bus boycott. Isn't that simple? Don't we be putting a lot on our flyers, don't we, Tiffany? Miss Robinson said, please stay off the buses. That's it.
Period. That's it. Nothing else. Dr. West, there is a question I want to throw at you. Maybe we'll say for Q&A, but can I read it to you as it relates to direct action?
Mm-hmm.
So Tanaya says, could the strategy of direct action be applied in a society where it is not strength in numbers? I'm a college student in Jackson, and many of my peers do not see the need for direct action. So is it still as effective even when many of the youth might not join the movement? Or are there ways we can get them to join? I hope that worded that. Yes, we fully understood. But yes, what do you do when numbers aren't necessarily there? How do you convince folks, right, to create?
And I think that's something we can come back to an end, but I immediately start thinking about like a Randall Robinson who went on this hunger strike because of some things he was seeing. One man. And I think about the attention that was drawn to that. So I think it would depend on what it is and the strategy. What is that direct action? But in most direct action, there is a need for a critical mass of people or a group of people working towards something, because sometimes the numbers matter, but then there are other times where that might not be the case. So I think it would just take some examination of what it is.
Yeah, no, I think your answer is spot on. And again, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, the desire to have everybody be involved. And we need to be clear. There's not a revolution. I'm gonna say revolution, but it applies to other movements as well. I could even just say movements, but to really dramatize the point, using Dr. King's word, there's never been a revolution that had the participation of everybody in the society. Right? The American Revolution was not implemented because everybody in those colonies all agreed. We know they ain't all signed the Declaration, right? They weren't all at Bunker Hill. We know it was like how many that got shot along with Crispus Attucks in the Boston Massacre. There's never been a situation where that's been the case. But countries have changed, off of the things that were started sometimes by a handful of folks. And so what we have got to believe is that if we have the right principles and values, if we have justice on our side, if we're acting out of the spirit of love that we're talking about, and if our tactics and strategies are sound, right, which is why we're doing this grounding in this letter, then we've got to believe that at some point other people will join on. And that's usually what winds up happening. Every movement winds up growing as you have success. Why? Because everybody wants to be down for winning team. And as people start to see success, they start to get involved, right? And so that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. But the other point that you raised, Dr. West, is equally important, that there are some specific tactics that are designed to work when you don't have the numbers that you want. And it might be a hunger strike. It might be some other type of demonstration that doesn't require 1,000 people in the streets, but can still get a message across. Sometimes the direct action is, just like in nowadays, some of y'all have seen these images that have been like broadcast, or what's the word I'm looking for, when you put an image from a projector projected onto the side of a building, right? That's a direct action.
Yeah,
that's a direct action. Might only take 2 people, right, to set up the projector, but still millions of people can wind up seeing it. And so that's the other thing to keep in mind. So if we keep those 2 things in mind, that one, tactically, there are some tactics that don't require a whole lot of people. And then secondly, that as we do our movements and as we're successful, that we will eventually grow our numbers. If we understand that, then we don't have to let that question that is always on our minds, how do I get more people? What's enough people to start? If we don't focus on that so much and just focus on the next right step that is consistent with this grounding that we are offering, our history shows us we'll be okay.
Yes. I think it's important to say also, like you mentioned, you do have to affect the critical masses. Your issue also has to cut across racial, ethnic, and social lines. And everybody can't look like you. If you think about any of the successful, and the first thing we come across is marches, and most people think about direct action as in some kind of a march. But let's go ahead and stay with that theme. Even in Selma, when Dr. King on Bloody Sunday, he put out a charge. If you care about humanity, you need to be in Selma. And they didn't violate that injunction. They turned around, but their direct action was to kneel down, pray, turn around Tuesday. So you have to be able to affect the masses. And then the other thing is you need to stay out in the streets for 30 days or more. And I even think about the Women's March that was so effective years ago. But it's about your issue. Make sure you examine your issue. That's part of the strategy. That's part of you in your design before you even do it. That's why the steps are so important. So don't just jump down to number 4, direct action.
This is good stuff, everybody. Hope
is.
you all are getting your strategies. We've shared 3 so far. They've been at the bottom of the slides, and we'll wrap it up and share some more at the end after we go through these other extracting strategy points. But just to consider direct action, but also to remember sometimes when you're engaged in direct action, it's a part of it is civil disobedience, disobeying unjust laws, and just laws applied unjustly. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Gerald to lead us in discussing this strategy.
Yeah, the whole civil disobedience, just and unjust laws. But just stay with us, guys. I know this is the back end, but this is very important because this is something that we may be called to do here based on what's going on with this administration here. Who knows in the future? So we may be mobilizing a call to mobilize. But let me just look at that. Let's look at that the first phrase, civil disobedience. And I just want to touch on that part first. Those 8 clergy, they challenged Dr. King for violating the injunction. And I think Dr. King's response was just it was just surgical. I mean, it was a great response to them throughout the letter. But before he got too deep in his explanation about just and unjust laws, he spoke on the Supreme Court's decision that outlawed segregation back in 1954, that law of segregation. And this, to me, it just felt like Dr. King holding up this mirror early on to the clergy and all the segregationalists, and he was pointing out their hypocrisy on who they would condemn, why laws are broken or civil disobedience is even exercised, because their entire school system was still segregated. You know, it's like how dare you? You know, a nice little tame spanking before he goes into the instruction. And Dr. King went on to say, you know, you disobey an unjust law, you must do it openly, you must do it lovingly, and willing to accept the penalty. I'm looking at these mugshots here. You think they understood if we gonna violate this injunction and go get locked up? I mean, I don't know if I ever seen so many little snickers on these faces. So I just wanted to bring that up because they understood the methodology and the Kingian nonviolence that was going on. So they was ready. So into what he's saying here a little bit deeper, there are just and there are unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what's the difference between the two? How does one determine when a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in internal and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. I mean, that's pretty black and white right there, guys. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. These are just a few examples of unjust and just laws. There are some instances when a law is just on its face and unjust in its application. For instance, I was arrested Friday on a charge of parading without a permit. So Dr. King really breaks this down and he gives us enough here to determine just and unjust laws, but I encourage you guys to get in that letter because, man, you think he breaks it down here. He goes on and he continues to talk to them that, you know, is very easy and simple to process. Who's on here with me? Vanessa, you want
we all on here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just add, you know, part of the reason why I think this is a critical point, it was critical then and it's critical now. And it's because we have folks, I mean, he's responding to these 8 ministers, but the reality is that we have folks in our own community that often make the same point, right? Why y'all out there blocking the streets and blocking traffic? Y'all are breaking the law, right? How many times we heard this in 2020? Like, this isn't abstract. We have folks in our community that, you know, are staunch law and order, and even in our community, they'll say, hey, yeah, you know, some things ain't right, but y'all need to act proper. Right? You can't go out there breaking the law. We even hear it sometimes in the discussions that we have around instances of police violence. Well, did you comply? Did you have your hands in the 10 and 2? Like all of this. And so this is a thing, not just coming from our opposition, but even within our own community. So this discussion around just and unjust laws is important, again, so that even folks in our community, who again may not be the ones that wind up being involved in direct action or civil disobedience, whatever, but we got to have folks at least understanding why just leaning on law and order, just leaning on, oh, you breaking the law, that does not apply, because there is such a thing as just and unjust laws. And Dr. King lays that out. So as we move forward and we're engaging in these discussions, sometimes internal, sometimes family discussions, again, this letter and this framing provides a blueprint that we can use to move folks that might be a little more conservative, that might be a little bit more not willing to engage in or even support civil disobedience, right? But that they can at least better understand, oh, I get why, we can't just look at laws and breaking the law. At the end of the day, slavery was the law, but it was unjust. Jim Crow was the law, but it was unjust. And similarly, today, we have things at least pretending to be law, right, that are equally unjust. And we need everybody in our community to be clear about that, even if not everybody in our community necessarily acts on that themselves.
That's right.
That's absolutely true, Cliff. I think, that's one of the challenges we face today, that when you hear about the laws and the things that are happening, so many people say, well, we got to obey the law. It's hard in this nation. That was I was looking at a quote from Bernice A. King today that said we have to stop romanticizing the founding of this nation. And that's what we've done in a nation where so much of its power was built on slavery and just the dehumanization of indigenous people and harm to other people. To hear this nation, or people in this nation, in response to George Floyd having a police officer's knee on his neck for 9.5 minutes, say things like, was he complying? Now y'all see the man on the video. He on the ground with a knee on his neck. But there's something about the ideology of supremacy, in particular with Black people in this nation, that causes people not to think clearly. And you can have absolutely the most amoral, immoral things happening in front of you to a group of people, to groups of people, and somehow people will find a way to rationalize. And so if you're talking about laws and you see you're faced with this law that is clearly not moral, but the way we talk about it globally, I look at news reports today and they say, it's against international law to starve people. And I'm like, international law, that's against just moral law. So there are higher things even than a law. Somebody's asking on YouTube here, Ridge is asking, should we carry the Constitution with us and the laws for our state? I would say yes, so you can actually talk about that if you ever encounter anything. I was in a protest with Reverend William Barber, and he pulled out the laws as he was talking to police who confronted him about doing something as part of the protest. And he was like, your law here says this. I said, dang, this man pulled out the law. Because when you're faced with that and you're law enforcement, sometimes folks won't care. But what you're confronting a person with is, this is what you say in your country. And that's what Dr. King said in the speech the night before he was assassinated. All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. And so you have a way to do that, but then there are just laws that are applied unjustly as well. And so Dr. King explains that, more here, how a just law is applied unjustly. Like there's nothing wrong with this on its face, but the way you're attempting to apply it is unjust. And that's an important distinction. Then he says we have a moral responsibility. That just to leave that up there for people. If you imagine over the course of time, if people, as you're facing your neighbors being taken away and taken to concentration camps in the 30s, and today, as we're looking at what's happening to people in Gaza, and we're looking at the condition of water in some of these states in our nation, and the violence that we're seeing here perpetuated against immigrants, and the language, aliens, illegals, putting an S on something and just calling people by that name, this language that leads to genocidal behavior, because language precedes. I mean, you have to think about, where do these unjust laws come from? They build up over time. But this is the strategy: integrate strategic civil disobedience with understanding of what the results of the civil disobedience may be. Like, know beforehand, if I engage in this civil disobedience, this is what may happen to me. And I got to be good with that. That goes back to principle 4, right?
That's right.
Principle 4, we said nonviolence holds that unearned suffering for a just cause is redemptive. This goes with that. I'm going into something. I know this may happen to me, but this issue is just so important to me. I'm willing to do it.
And Dr.
What's
West,
that name for you?
And I'll say, Dr. West, the kids say, you stand 10 toes down in it, right? And 10 toes down is that you exist and you fully accept the decision and commitment you made, and also, accepting whatever consequences that come, including being arrested, so you got to stand 10 toes down in it.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. I think that was part of that commitment, and it's like, I go back to the strategy from Dr. King, because I don't think we talk enough about it. Wyatt T. Walker, when they had to shut down because of the mayor's race, everybody left, and they lost a lot of people that had pledged to go to jail. And when they returned, weeks later, they didn't have those numbers, but they still launched this campaign. During that downtime, Wyatt T. Walker circled back to Birmingham. He diagrammed the city. They had lawyers that were trying to figure out, let's make sure that we're breaking a law and it's not a felony, that it's a misdemeanor, that we can still pay and bond out. So there's a lot of things and a lot of levels that are working behind the scene. And that's so important because, obviously you don't want to break a law just because you don't like the law. You're not gonna garner any support with that. So I think, you have to look at this holistically. We're talking about just and unjust laws, but they had to get there. You know what I'm saying? They anticipated the injunction coming because it happened in so many other campaigns. They knew it was coming. That's the part I wanted to point out, undergird.
Thank you, Gerald.
Yep.
So I don't know if we have any questions or comments, or anybody want to share anything about that. But as we move forward and Gerald shares here, just share your comments. Share with some people to still tune in and let them know about our workshop coming up on June 28th. That's a Saturday. So we want to just keep reiterating. We're doing 6 of these, and probably at the next year we'll look at how to come back and spend some more time together.
Absolutely. We're getting into the faith and justice now, and this really just separates my mind, because if you believe in a higher power and you call him God and you worship the Son, you are a believer. As we know, Dr. King was a Baptist minister. Right here, you see him, as I read this, in deep disappointment. I have wept over the laxity of the church, but be assured that my tears have been tears of love. There can be no deep disappointment where there is not deep love. Yes, I love the church. How could I do otherwise? I'm in a rather unique position of being the son, the grandson, and the great-grandson of preachers. Yes, I see the church as the body of Christ. But, oh, how we have blemished and scarred that body through social neglect and through fear of being nonconformists. And so here you have kind of a real transparent moment, if you will, from Dr. King speaking to people of faith base, and he talks about the tears that he shed, because he's hurt deeply. They're looking at being nonconformists, and that apathy that I was talking about earlier. It's going to be okay. Your time will come. We all know you're going to get your civil rights. And how does the phrase go? Church was the most segregated period from 9 to 11 o'clock or 9 to 1 o'clock, depending on what church you're in or what faith you are. But Dr. King is expressing sheer hurt right here, and he's almost appealing, because these are supposed to be his people, his brethren, you know what I'm saying? And the way you can equate it with a quick analogy is if you think about a relationship, if you're in a loving, deep relationship with someone and they hurt you or disappoint you, you're going to hurt deeply. This is what he's expressing here. If that disappointment and hurt from them, you'll be feeling the exact same way that Dr. King is expressing himself right here, that deep hurt. So he felt that the church was going to be a bigger ally than they were. And as a whole, because I don't want to just cast a big net out here, that he didn't have allies and our Caucasian brothers and sisters, there was no support, because there was. But as a whole, and it didn't just start here in Birmingham. It was something that he was expressing here in the letter. But like I said, he had human laboratories and other campaigns, and he's well into the tactics. Okay, so here he's still on faith and justice. He says, the early Christians rejoiced when they were deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideals and principles of popular opinion. It was the thermostat that transformed the mores of society. So he's saying, that's what we're supposed to do. Now you're talking. If you guys got on board with that, we could pave the way. We pioneer this thing. We shorten that curve that we're going through. We're supposed to not just be out here just sitting back, watching, observing, and having church within these walls. We need to set the temperature. We need to be the thermostat. So Dr. King is again appealing to what I call his brethren, his peeps, really. I just thought that was a real moment of transparency, because he's deeply hurt with them not responding as he wanted them to. The strategy talks about convey a moral appeal to entities not aligned with justice, even though the justice may be a component of the entity's fundamental tenets. And that's just basically saying what he said they weren't doing. You guys stand for this humanity, morality, grace, and yet you stand by and you see our path, and you're not jumping in and giving us a hand up. You're not aligning with us. That's I'll put a pin in it right there. There's so much more to say, but let's move on.
Yeah. And so then Dr. King continues on, because again, this letter is absolutely brilliant. And he talks about negative and positive peace. Okay, so I'm gonna read it, and then Cliff and I'll kind of get into it a little bit as we begin to close things out. But we talk about negative peace and positive peace. So Dr. King says, right, I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizens counselor of the Ku Klux Klan, right? But the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who consistently says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection, right? So what Dr. King speaks to here is that, hey, there are people who directly oppose us. And you know what? I almost feel as if those who almost kind of, and what we would kind of consider folks who kind of just float in the middle, that, you know, are almost a moderate or consider themselves a liberal, but are telling people to just wait your turn, to slow down, are often more complacent and more of a problem than those who are directly outright with their discontent. So one thing to consider about negative peace, right, and positive peace is that nonviolence seeks true peace, which is positive peace, which does not exclude tension, right? So as Cliff talked about, as we talked about throughout the training, is that us getting to this beloved community, us getting to this place of justice, right, does not exclude us having tension, does not exclude us having compliment, right, or having conflict, right, or disagreement. It's just about the fact that true peace must include justice, right? For us to have peace, justice must be involved and included, right? So just something else for Dr. King to consider. And also really love how Dr. King, who oftentimes is depicted as this passive person, is so critical and so direct about his comments in this letter, but also exists in these ways of love and care for those who he's expressing his dissent towards or his disagreement towards.
Yeah, and I won't really add on a lot because I know we're trying to get to the Q&A, but just two quick thoughts. One, I was thinking about this even at the time when some of us who are on here may remember a couple of months ago during the occupant of the White House giving a speech to Congress, Representative Al Green stood up and told him and waved his cane and said, "You do not have a mandate," right? And the ways that he got criticized for taking that action. That was direct action, right? And the ways that he got criticized for those who felt that sitting there silently, negative peace, right, was somehow not contributing to the lies that were being told, right? And we find this a lot. And so what we all have to recognize, those of us who are in alignment and like-minded, is that sometimes we have got to disrupt the negative piece. That goes back to that tension, right? We've got to disrupt the negative piece or else we will never get to the positive piece.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be uncomfortable to be the disruptor,
Mm-hmm.
but it is absolutely required. And as Dr. King says, it's actually a part of our obligation to disrupt that negative piece in order to get to the positive piece.
That was surreal, Cliff. That moment when I started to read people's comments and they were saying, "Oh, he shouldn't have done that. That was out of order." I said, but he was talking about starving children. I mean, it's almost like you forget what he was talking about, what he was protesting for, that if you cut off SNAP, if you cut off Medicaid, if you bother these essential services, you're going to cause harm. You're going to create injustice. You're going to be inhumane. And to see people's response as, "We're going to censor you. You shouldn't have done that." Okay, then what this is being more devoted to order than to justice. This is a clear example of that because it was not even violent protest with people. He sat up and raised his cane. Yeah, but he was doing that in a demonstration of, I am utterly devastated and concerned about what's about to happen to people. And that negative piece is a very violent thing. I know that sounds funny, but negative peace is very violent. This idea that you should just be quiet while people are harmed.
Yeah, I also,
and that would be Kingian if you did that. Lets me know people don't really understand Dr. King.
Yeah, and a lot of times, I mean, I know we're talking about the campaigns, guys, but if we're talking about employing this lifestyle as a nonviolence practitioner, we bring this back home. Circle it back to your domestic life, the negative peace in your household between you and your husband because you went to bed mad, and you woke up mad at each other. So now you're communicating through the child. Tell your daddy, "I'll pick you up from practice at 5 o'clock." But your daddy right there in the kitchen. Why don't you tell him? So that negative piece permeates, and it's under the surface. There's no violence, but it's negative. And I think that we have to call it out and exercise it out in our domestic relationships, whether you're at the office or at home, and certainly in these campaigns of what we're talking about. So I always want to bring it back home because if you're going to be a practitioner, you can't just do it and be nonviolent when you're on a campaign. It's a way of life.
Right. And just throwing in there that this is also when people act in this way of being conflict avoidant, right? You can't be avoidant of the conflict. You cannot be avoidant of the tension. So think about this in the larger work, but also like Gerald was naming interpersonally, how do you avoid the conflict to keep this negative piece, to keep I'm gonna just, keep everything, I'm gonna keep everything easy, keep everything copacetic, and not deal with it, right, in love, so that you can get to a positive piece in a different place. So
we could study this letter all night, but we won't. We know y'all y'all want to do that, or maybe some of you do. But we just, as we're wrapping up and we're about to go into Q&A, King and strategies within the letter. We just went through these strategies. Want to put them before you again. Build a strategy that reflects the interrelatedness of humanity. Reiterate moral clarity and humane concerns that encompass the issue. Be intentional and creative with time. Express urgency and wisdom simultaneously. Dr. King had a masterful way of saying this is urgent, fierce urgency of now we can't wait, why we can't wait. Now, here's some wisdom about how we go about it. Here's a strategic approach to get us to where we want to go. We want to maximize direct action in tandem with the other 5 steps. It's very important in Kenyan nonviolence that those steps come together, and that also the steps are undergirded by the principles, i.e., we don't do direct action, not in Kenyan nonviolence, that doesn't exemplify principle 5. We're going to choose love instead of hate. That's why they have to go together. That's why I often ask when people invite me to lead them in strategy sessions and something they're about to do, what do you know about the principles? Because you can't get to Kenyan nonviolence without the principles of nonviolence. So you want to be sure you all keep studying. Study and understand laws and their application. There you go, Ridge, on YouTube. Utilize the understanding for wise, morally sound strategy. Listen, you can't protest without knowing the law. Because you have to know what you're even protesting for. We have some legislation that's happening now that when I start to read it, I have to cross-reference and go look at different things. Sometimes people will tell me something is in a bill and it's not even in there. I have to go read it for myself. So you don't want to find yourself involved in direct action for something that's not even true as well. So you have to be well-informed. That's steps 1 and 2. That information gathering and education. Get yourself around some folks and in some groups where education matters, where you understand what's happening with issues. Integrate strategic civil disobedience with understanding of the results. Incorporate the connection between faith and justice. Now, this is a hard place for us. So much injustice we see around the world is done in the name of deity, in the name of God, in the name of Jesus. There's so many things that we see happening that just don't quite line up with justice. And when we read key texts, we can see that justice is integrated in key scriptures and texts for the great religions of the world religions. And so one thing we can do is convey a moral appeal to entities not aligned with justice, even though justice may be a component of the entity's foundational tenets. Like in your own stuff, it says, learn to do good, don't harm people, feed the hungry, help the poor, do these things. How are you not aligned with your own stuff? Well, is it your stuff? And so you have to start to think about strategically what we do. If the word appeal tripped you up, then just think, we're trying to get to an ultimate goal. That's it. Build a strategy that reflects the pursuit of positive peace. Educate on and demonstrate the difference between negative and positive peace. That's just 6 of the strategies. If you examine them, start to pull them out and think about them as you're doing some different things. We're going to go now into a Q&A. I think Cliff may have some other action steps. The team may have some other action steps here, but these are just 4 on the slide. As you're getting your questions together, we want to see those questions on Facebook, YouTube, here in the webinar, on X, LinkedIn. We have some questions and comments over on LinkedIn. So anything you want to ask, we want to respond to questions. So, and here are those action steps as you're preparing your questions. Join with 5 to 7 people. Who's in your group? This is a phenomenal time to build community and to say, are there some people I can join with to develop an action plan for addressing a key issue? We have discounted our online masterclass for people taking these workshops that are presented by Black Voters Matter and the King Center. You go to the kingcenterinstitute.org, a masterclass now has a $110 discount. And we want to, if you can encourage 20 people to sign up for the next workshop. And then we want you to start to talk and strategize among yourself, host a workshop, participant gathering, and a discussion for the June 28th workshop, where it's on a Saturday, so you won't be doing it late at night, but get your group together and say, we're going to engage in this workshop, and then afterwards, we're going to talk about what we're going to do with it. Want you to take some action and then share it with Black Voters Matter and with the King Center, what you're doing. So we have any questions
And just to add on to that action around organizing a workshop, let us know. Send us an email. We're going to be sending out an email after this with some information. Let us know if you want to do one of those, host a workshop in your house, your community center, your business, wherever. Let us know. And we'll try to find a way to amplify. Send us a selfie of you and your 20 people at your workshop, and we may lift it up on our social media. Everybody has a role to play in this process. Everybody who's watching this right now has a role to play in this process. Everybody can be an organizer in some form or another. So we want everybody who's here to see that you have a role in this. Because when we do that, that's how we multiply.
Listen, if you get some people together for the June 28th workshop, we need to find a way, production team, to stream some gatherings in so that we can see that you're with us. And then we can come up with some discussion questions that you all discuss after the workshop is over.
Because we are all
invite people in.
Interconnected.
Yep.
We are mutually connected, and we want to be able to see that and show that. And don't think that there's nothing else for you to do in between now and the next workshop. Because again, you can be having these conversations, you could be sharing the information that we're sending you, sharing these video clips, signing people up. So there's plenty to do between now and the workshop. And you watching this, I'm talking to you, you have a role to play in this.
Absolutely. Do we have questions? Are there questions for us here in the webinar or on social media? Let's take a look.
I'm seeing a lot about the recording here and how they could access it later.
The stream will stay up on our social media platform. So this stream to the King Center's YouTube channel, Black Voters Matter YouTube channel, Black Voters Matter Facebook, the King Center Facebook, Dr. Bernice King's X. So it's streamed on multiple platforms, and we will not be taking it down. So you will be able to watch the stream. We just encourage registration because then you will get the handout. So for the June 28th workshop, we just want to encourage people to register so that we have your information and can share handouts and other resources with you.
Hey team, there's a quick question in the Q&A chat from Kia Gregory. She's asking for any advice on how to find a political home, particularly around direct action, policy form, and liberation. Some organizations, she says, for example, are coalitions and not necessarily volunteer-based.
There's a couple of ways to answer that, right? When we think about political home, we can have political homes at different levels, right? Like, you can have a virtual political home. Like, we'd like for you to think about Black Voters Matter as part of your political home, and you're able to connect with us with things that we do either in person or virtually, workshops like this, like that can be a part of your political home. But I think the heart of what Kia, and thank you, Kia, because I see you've been active in the chat and you've been with us ride or die for the past couple of hours. So thank you, Kia. But I think that, part of what Kia may be trying to get at is like finding that political home near your home, like geographically, like near where you live. And it can be challenging, right? To find a group that you're in alignment with on like the specific issues that we're organizing around and the tactics that they're taking to address those issues. And so, I'm not sure where Kia is, but I think, all of us, it's just really kind of incumbent that we're doing, like we talked about, research, right? We're doing the research, that we're trying to see like who are the groups that are doing something. One of the things I often tell people is go to your city council or your county commission meeting or something like that, because a lot of times you find in those settings people that are active, right? And they may not just be active just in terms of going to meetings, but they may be active in other ways. A lot of times they're not the ones that are getting attention. They're not the ones that the media is going to talk about. In fact, sometimes they're the ones that the media is trying to bury. And so, but going to various activities where you might be able to find like-minded folks, that's a part of the process. It takes a little bit of work sometimes. And again, connecting with organizations that are more visible, maybe national organizations, because sometimes we're able to connect you. So depending on where you are, Kia, we might be able to say, hey, you're in one of our states where we've got 10 local partner organizations or 20 partner organizations. Or if you're in Georgia, we do work we have partners in 70 counties. So, so sometimes you can reach out to an organization that is bigger, but they might be able to direct you to, hey, we got some organizing family in this particular place and you're close to them. Y'all should really connect. So that's just a couple of thoughts for that question.
Thanks, Cliff. We have two other questions in the chat. First, Jim Coddington is asking if the files would be shared after the presentation. Yes, we will send that out shortly, Mr. Coddington. And then there's also a question from Melissa Taylor.
Which file?
The presentation.
Okay, we'll send the handout. The handout has most of this information in it, so we'll send that to them.
Okay, thanks for correcting. And then there's also a question from Melissa Taylor. Do we consider calling, emailing, visiting elected officials direct action? And then she's basically saying that nothing is too small. How do we feel about calling, emailing, and visiting elected officials?
It's very important, and it is direct action. It's petitioning, but doing it individually. It's also if you're a part of a mass of people doing it, it's even more impactful. So when you do it, think about how many other people are doing it with you. If you can find a way strategic to do it like that, but it matters anyway, even if you're doing it by yourself. Sometimes I don't even know if anybody's doing it with me, but some things I see are so egregious that I say, I don't care if nobody else send the email. I'm sending one today. I'm calling today because I'm a citizen. This person is someone I voted for to be in Congress, to be in the House, to be in the Senate. And I want them to know how I feel about this, what I think about it. And so if you get enough people that are civic minded like that and understand, we got a right and we have a responsibility to call people who are in position to make change and say, this is my expectation of you. You're either meeting it or you're not. I encourage us to call people when they're doing the things that we believe are just and fair, so that we're celebrating when they're right, and then we're willing to correct and say, hey, something has to change with this when it's not being done in a fair and just way. But absolutely, that is direct action. That's our civic responsibility. It's not about just voting. Once people get in office, we have to keep communicating and saying these are our expectations. Thank you for meeting them, or let me let you know how you're not meeting them for me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You guys think back, I would tune in every now and then to Rachel Maddow, and when she was that first 100 days she was on, and she was one of the networks that was showing all of the town meetings, and the administration and senators was coming back to their constituents. And I would just caution you to, be nonviolent in your approach. Obviously, that's what this is about. And they weren't so nonviolent. They had something on their chest and they wanted to get out. You guys remember they started doing cardboard cutouts, sitting in chairs. They didn't want to go out there. And I think there was a tagline or talking points that, there were props and paid participants, the whole nine, the usual suspects kind of way to throw out, momentum. But that is absolutely direct action. And that could be you mobilizing within your circle to, to write those letters and to make your voice heard. Like Dr. West said good and bad.
Right now, if you're like me, you feel like you do just about anything to stop some of the suffering that you're seeing. And the only thing that keeps me as a nonviolent practitioner is knowing that doing anything might not effectuate the change I want to see, and certainly may cause some harm, some moral shame for me. And you have to think about all of that and say, okay, what's the strategy going forward? What's the strategic approach? Because we're looking at things now that, man, you just may wake up in the morning thinking about it. And I'm of a faith tradition where people say you understand it better by and by. I don't want to. I don't want to understand poverty better by and by. I don't want to understand police brutality better. I don't want to understand war better. I just want it to end. And I think sometimes in our spirituality, we can get to the place where we will deter ourselves from justice because we think it's something that's being permitted for some greater good. Ain't no greater good to genocide. There's none. There's no greater good to these things that we're doing to each other. And so we have to decide now, using some of these things we've talked about here, how can we use what Dr. King said in his letter to effectuate some change? And how can we make it sustainable? Because if you think about it, Black Voters Matter is so needed because what happened in the 60s with the Voting Rights Act, it wasn't sustained. You had an assassinated leader, but you also had a kind of sense of we may have made it somewhere. And so now we see this dismantling of the Voting Rights Act, and you're fighting again voter suppression. So what can we do now that we can sustain, and we can say we put some things in place that'll hold for a while, and then we go back to the heart change? Because if you notice in the letter, Dr. King was very clear that something's going on with us, something going on with the church, something going on with the white moderate, something going on with y'all who wrote me this statement. I mean, he found a good way to phrase it, a powerful way to phrase it without dehumanizing. But we have to have some legislative change and some heart change. Yeah. And so think about too, what can happen in our communities from that perspective of how do we not wind up back here again?
Yeah, and just one other thing I want to add, in combination with Kia's question about finding a political home as well as direct action, is that, y'all, we're experiencing a level of intersectional oppression, and every day there is an attack on higher education. There's an attack on women's rights. There's an attack on trans rights. There's an attack on folks' access to Medicaid and Medicare, right? Both within our country and globally. And so also consider, where's your political home, but where can you, as we say, walk and chew gum, where can you show up? And maybe, for instance, I saw a young lady, she is African but Palestinian in Gaza, and I have $5 and I gave $5 here, right? And I live in Louisiana, where they are housing all of the folks that they are arresting, that they've arrested from the universities. They are locking them up here in the prison down here in Louisiana, right? And so there are organizers here. So just in the ways that you can show up and be in coalition, right? Both in your organizing space, but in coalition with the issues that are happening. You can't be everywhere, but do what you can to really be intersectional in your approach, because we're not up against just one battle right now. We're up against so many battles right now. Yeah. So many battles we're up against right now. And you can't do it all, but do what you can. Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead, Cliff.
No, I'm sorry. I wanted to touch on, I think it's the same question. It's a question about somebody asked about, the phone banking and those things and whether or not that's direct action. And I certainly agree. The answer is yes. Those are forms of direct action. And as we've already pointed out in this workshop, that there are different levels of direct action, including civil disobedience, right? And one of the things that I learned early on as a student organizer on the campus where I went to college was, your action, your tactic has got to match the challenge in front of you, right? We used to have some folks where every time there was an issue on campus, and our campus had a history of building takeovers, right? And whenever there was an issue, they always have somebody be like, well, do we need to do a takeover, right? Do we need to take over Day Hall? And that particular issue may not have called for that, right? We trying to get a better menu at the student union. I don't know if we need to do a takeover for that, right? And so your tactic has got to match the demands and the obstacles that you're facing. And so right now, while there's certainly a whole spectrum of direct actions, and we've been very clear that there's a role for everybody to play along that spectrum. One of the things I've been saying is that we have to be clear that with the nature of the opposition that we are up against, that we are going to have to eventually look at, and some people already have, at civil disobedience, right? Because that's the nature. We're not up against an administration that is doing business as usual. We've had bad administrations before. We've had some that have tried to limit protests before. We've had some that have tried to be law and order, right, before. We've had some that have targeted various populations, but we've not really faced this level, arguably since Reconstruction, right? And so when you're up against those types of forces, again, your tactics have got to match the nature of the force that you're up against. We are not going to phone bank our way out of fascism. We are not going to door knock our way out of dictatorship. Is there space for each of those activities? Most definitely. But we have got to be clear as a community, as a movement, that given what we are up against, we are going to have to look at the full spectrum of nonviolent civil disobedience and direct action, because that's the nature of what we're facing. So, yeah, I just wanted to offer that, and it also touches on Henry's question in the Zoom chat, where he says, obviously, this is a long-term strategy. How would you describe the stage we're currently at? And so, connecting to what I just said, we're at a pretty early stage at this point. And I think that applies not just to our response, but also to what it is that the powers that be are doing. They've not yet used they've used a lot of bad, but they've not yet used the full force of what they've told us that they're going to do. This is not me speculating. Reading is fundamental. It's in Project 2025, right? So they've gotten through a lot of it, but there's still a lot of pages left in that 900-something page document. So just as a matter of fact, they have not yet gone through their full agenda, and it gets worse as we go. So we're not at the stage where they're done, and we certainly aren't at the stage where we're done with like what our tactics and strategies are going to be.
Let me add to that, Cliff, that in Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, I just want to encourage you to read that book, to read the letter over and over and over again, to read Why We Can't Wait, Strive Toward Freedom, to read Gift of Love, to read Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, in which Dr. King said we're going to have to engage in, he believed, mass civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience. And so we have to start to strategize as to around what that would look like, but also understand, as he also wrote in that book, that what we're facing now is what he called white backlash, which is not to say he believed the whole of white people were racist, but he understood that anytime we make any progress in this nation, just something that this the 5-year anniversary just the other day of the killing of George Floyd, you saw in those months, that year following, some progress in some key areas. All of that they're attempting to reverse now. That's backlash. We see this progress. There are people who are so ensconced in an ideology of supremacy that they believe that any progress for Black people means that they're being discriminated against and they're going to be wiped out, which is not true. This is just us saying that we want equity, we want justice, we want fairness. We're not trying to get rid of you. We're trying to create a community. How do we do that? But when you have that backlash, what that means is you have to have a strategy to deal with it. That for some people, any measure of progress towards genuine community, genuine justice, they're going to come against that progress with resistance and then call that justice and call that equity. And so we have to sit down and discover what we're facing. And one of the things we want to do is start to say, let's talk about it, and then let's strategize. Let's get understanding of what it is, and let's strategize. And so that's coupled. It has to go together. I need some principles, because any nonviolent civil disobedience that's going to be called Kenyan nonviolent civil disobedience will have to be undergirded with these principles. But the principles might not be what you think they are. That's why we encourage you to continue to study. It is 8:59 ET. And what a powerful time, this has been. And we thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part. So we want to close out and invite you to continue to comment on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on LinkedIn, on all the platforms that we're on, to go to, I believe it's Black Voters Matter Fund. I always leave the fund off and get the wrong address, .org. Go there, find out more about what Black Voters Matter is doing. Go to the kingcenter.org and discover more about what the King Center is doing, and continue to watch out for this partnership. Thank you, Cliff and Black Voters Matter team, Latasha, Namsa, Venkayla, Danita, everybody who's made this run. And thank you to the King Center team. Thank you, Angelo and Gerald and Tiffany. It's been a rich conversation and a rich workshop. And if you all have any closing comments as we leave out, it has to be quick. It's 9 o'clock. If you
just want to, as you did, just want to shout out our team, Black Voters Matter, Nomsa and Kayla, and everybody at the King Center that helped make this possible. This is the first of 5, y'all, and more than that, because all of you all out there are going to help multiply by inviting more people in, so that more people can see these, right? And so we're excited. Thank y'all. Thank you, Dr. West. Thank you, everybody. Be love.
Yes.
Peace King says, be love.
Be love. And we want to tell you, get ready, get ready, get ready. As the preacher used to say, and Dr. Bernice A. King will be, she's planning to join us. It's tentative, but we're believing it'll happen for the August session, the August workshop, the September workshop, and the October workshop. So we look forward to having her be a part of the upcoming workshops as well. Thank you, team.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression. Man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. changed the world when he demonstrated what could be achieved through nonviolence. Now, you can learn how to live and practice this philosophy yourself through Nonviolence 365 Online, an innovative digital experience developed by the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. Nonviolence 365 Online features extensive video interviews with real nonviolence practitioners, including the King Center CEO Dr. Bernice A. King, King Center certified instructors and trainers, and veterans of the civil rights movement. Explorations of the historic campaigns that helped Dr. King forge his philosophy. Immersive, annotated reading experiences that enhance Dr. King's most influential writings on nonviolence. Custom activities, including quizzes and interactive scenarios to help you practice along the way. Real-world exercises to help you start applying nonviolence in your daily life. Nonviolence 365 is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, engaging, and acting that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. It isn't just a concept for philosophers or political leaders. Nonviolence 365 is a powerful, practical approach to dealing with conflict and dismantling injustice. Whether it's in your personal life, in your school or workplace, your local community, or a national movement. Dr. King, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and many others sought to create the beloved community, a society built on global cooperation and equity. This wasn't a lofty utopian dream. It's a realistic and achievable goal because each and every one of us has the power to make it happen by committing to nonviolence as a way of life. Take the first step today with Nonviolence 365 Online.
Most important is that y'all know where y'all going to vote on election day. Voting rights is important to me because that's our seat at the table.
We need to continuously promote civic engagement and pull our people back into community organizing, understanding your rights.
There you go. Good job.
Then we got the bus, my canvases out here. Make sure you out here vote.
Child care, education, fair housing, whatever you need, we have it right here.
That's what I'm talking about. Do something. I hear you, sister. I hear you.
The power of the people is like a power they can't deny.
There needs to be representation, someone to say like, this is for us, by us, we care. Representation matters.
To be able to see Black Voters Matter, having just organic conversations with people, just that pure authenticity and that community.
All day, let's go, Warner Robins. Make sure your vote is counted.
If you see there's a law in your community that you don't like, you have to be able to speak up.
This is my first time voting. It feels amazing, actually. You want to vote it?
I love you, sis.
Love is an action word.
Say that.
Go out and vote.
Everybody get on out here.
We want to make sure that people know that we are loved and that they have power.
We got a ways to go to get the things that we demand for our community. Spreading love, building power.
Become, believe, be love. Be a part of Be Love Day 2025 with the King Center. This July 9th, join others from around the world and take the pledge to be love. To meet this current moment, who should we be? What can we do? And what love-centered goals can we accomplish together? Be Love Day will answer these questions and more. Let's commit to be love. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. Will you stand with us? Save the date, July 9th, 2025. Be Love Day. Visit thekingcenter.org/belove to take the pledge and to stay updated about Be Love Day 2025.